Hey guys, tonight we're time traveling into the musty, coal-dusted reality of wartime Britain, somewhere between a blackout and a boiled beet. The Blitz is technically over, but the noise never really stopped. You're not in uniform, you're not on the battlefield, but you are on the front line of hunger, cold, and the eternal search for a proper cup of tea. Good news, you're alive in 1942. Bad news, so are ration books. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up with a shiver in a room that could double as an icebox. Your breath fogs in the air like a ghost in training. The windows are frosted on the inside. The blackout curtains hang like depressed ghosts. And the wallpaper has started its own slow-motion escape from the wall. You're curled under 3 itchy blankets and still cold. One of them is actually your dad's army coat. The other is technically a curtain. And the third just smells like old socks and wartime memories. Your pillow is a sack of horsehair with the personality of a brick. Your mattress is springs, despair, and a suggestion of comfort. You don't get up, you emerge, like a creature uncertain whether the world outside is worth it. And honestly, it might not be. First, stop the fireplace, or rather, the place where a fire could be. If coal wasn't rationed tighter than chocolate, you stare at the cold grate and wonder if staring will warm it. It doesn't. The ashes from last week's fire mock you from the tray. You shuffle into the kitchen, which is also the living room, and also your younger brother's makeshift bed. The lino floor assaults your bare feet with all the warmth of a disapproving landlord. There's a kettle well, a dented tin thing that thinks it's a kettle, and it's rattling over a low gas flame. Gas is still flowing, for now. But the gas bill isn't. That's in its own kind of trench warfare with your mum. Breakfast, theoretically. You check the pantry. There's some powdered egg, some margarine that smells like betrayal, and 1 slice of bread, so thin you could use it as a lens. You toast it over the flame until it reaches warm cardboard status. Spread a whisper of fat and call it luxury. Milk, you shake the tin of dried powder. It echoes. Your tea is hot water with ambition. You sip it. It lies to your soul. You check the ration book hanging on its string. 2 coupons left for bacon, 1 for tea, none for sugar. The coupons are tiny, stiff, and sacred. Losing one is like misplacing your identity, or worse, your chocolate allocation. Historians agree that British rationing was a marvel of government planning and public cooperation. But also, you might start crying if someone mentions oranges. You haven't seen one since 1940, and you're starting to think they were propaganda. You tie your worn scarf a hand-me-down from an uncle, or maybe a tablecloth. No one remembers, and wrap your coat. Buttoned only at the top, like every working-class ghost of winter. The buttons don't match, the sleeves don't quite reach, but it's warm enough for someone else's size. Outside, the street is gray. The air tastes like soot, and the newspaper headlines still shout about victory gardens and bomb shelters. A woman walks past with curlers under a headscarf, a basket under her arm, and the eyes of someone who hasn't had sugar in 2 years. You nod in solidarity. Your morning begins with toast made of almost bread, tea made of barely flavor, and a weather forecast that consists of yes. And that's just the first 10 minutes of surviving the British home front. You didn't sleep badly last night. You slept British wartime standard, which means you only woke up twice to distant booms, and once when the neighbor's cat launched itself off the air raid shelter and into your wall. You share a room with 2 siblings and a draft that might actually qualify as a guest. The blackout curtains did their job, but not well enough to keep out the frost or the ever-present smell of cabbage. You roll out of bed quietly, so you don't wake the small child sleeping at the foot of it and immediately regret touching the floor. It's cold. It's wet. It's probably a crime scene. You slip on your wool socks, which are less sock and more thread-holding memory together, and start layering 2 vests, a scratchy jumper and a cardigan that could survive a nuclear blast, but not a wash cycle. The bedroom is dim, save for the tiny orange flicker of a coal stove in the hallway that someone might have managed to light last night. You make a beeline for it like a moth to the only working radiator in all of London. It's barely warmer than the wall, but you pretend your hot water bottle, which is actually an old whiskey flask wrapped in knitted fabric, gave up around 3 a.m. You clutched it anyway. It's the thought that counts. You try to remember what dreams you had. Probably food, or baths, or being somewhere not surrounded by ration books and peeling linoleum. Last night, the air raid siren went off around 1:20 a.m. Not a full warning, just a "you might want to acknowledge Germany" kind of alert. You sat up, listened, waited. And when no bombers came, you tucked your brother back under the blanket and hoped your house didn't become a crater by morning. Historians still argue whether Londoners really got used to nightly bombing. You decide yes. In the way a person gets used to toothaches or daily bus delays, you adapt. But you don't enjoy it. You hear your mom boiling the kettle again downstairs, not for tea, but for the week's one shared bath. The rule is simple: children first, adults second, water last. Sometimes even the dog gets a rinse if the mood's generous. You debate skipping it. You've got work today, and you're not sure you can face the full body embarrassment of being the third person into the tub. You head outside briefly to get the milk tin, hoping there's still a delivery. There is, but it's frozen into a creamy brick. You knock it loose with a spoon and carry it back like treasure. Inside, your sister is warming her shoes over the stove, and your dad is buttoning his collar with the seriousness of a man about to endure both German bombers and the morning train queue. The walls are covered in old posters. Make do and mend. Keep calm and carry on. Is your gas mask handy? The posters are bright. The hallway is not. You step around a bucket catching a ceiling leak and wonder for the 100th time how your grandparents survived this. And then remember they didn't have Twitter to complain on. Down the road, a neighbor waves from his window, holding up a loaf of national bread like it's a prize trout. You wave back solemnly. Everyone's business is everyone's business now. You share bathwater, sirens, bomb shelters, and sometimes your rations. But don't ask for sugar. That's where friendships go to die. Your coat's too thin. The streets are too damp. The war is too loud. But somehow, you get dressed, lace your boots, and keep moving. Because in 1942, surviving meant wearing every piece of wool you owned, sleeping through the occasional air raid, and learning how to start your day with a shiver and a slice of hope on stale toast. It's still early. The sun is barely up, but your bladder is wide awake. You shuffle to the toilet like a condemned man on a cold march. The hallway floorboards creak just enough to remind you that the house was built before indoor plumbing had a proper fan club. The toilet is, technically, indoors, but emotionally. It's halfway to Narnia. It lives in a little shed-like cubby at the end of the hall, past the coat hooks, past the place where the dog sleeps, and right before the door that sticks so badly it counts as exercise. You open the door. The toilet greets you with a mild odor of last night's decisions and this morning's regret. There's no central heating, obviously, and no insulation. So you brace for impact. Sitting down feels like initiating a blood pact with winter itself. There's a roll of toilet paper on the shelf. Correction, there's Izal paper gray, shiny, and famously useless. More effective as armor than absorption. You try not to move too much. Each wipe is like a personal betrayal. You look up at the government-issued sign. Remember one sheet. Will do, it won't. It never has. It never will. Soap. You're funny. There's a sliver in the dish that used to be soap. Now just a ghost of cleanliness. It's rationed. 2. You could use it. But then your mom will ask why the soap's gone again and whether you've been indulgent. You settle for wiping your hands on your trousers and pretending hygiene is a state of mind. Historians still debate whether British households truly adhered to water and paper rationing guidelines, or whether most simply nodded politely and ignored them. In this household, rationing is religion. You flush only once a day unless there's an emergency, which is vaguely defined and deeply negotiated. You jiggle the handle. The flush gurgles like it's reconsidering its existence. It eventually relents, coughing once, like an elderly smoker before wheezing down the contents of your shame. Behind the toilet is a small, useless window, with glass warped by age and fogged by condensation. There's a cracked flower pot on the sill, filled with ash instead of plants, sometimes used as a backup for cigarette ends, sometimes as a target for your brother's boredom. It's all very sanitary. Back in the hallway, you notice the bucket under the leak is almost full again. You carry it to the backyard and pour it into the soil, like a ritual offering to the damp gods. A pigeon coos sarcastically from the fence. You bow in defeat. The neighbor's kid runs past in a knitted jumper with only one sleeve, yelling about jam. You nod in approval. Jam is currency. Jam is happiness in a jar. Jam is probably illegal at this point, unless acquired via black market or grandmother. Back inside, your mum is yelling something about mind the pipes because if someone flushes while she's washing clothes, the pressure drops and the water heater screams like a banshee, which ironically might be the hottest thing in the house. Toilet duty's done. You return to the kitchen where your brother is cleaning his nails with the edge of a bread knife. You say nothing. Everyone's hygiene standards have shifted during wartime. You're all just trying to avoid dysentery without breaking the soap budget. In the mirror above the sink, you see yourself hair like a haystack, shadows under your eyes, and a mouth full of regret. You smile anyway. You're alive. You're upright. You have the memory of a successful flush. You splash your face with cold water because warm water is for the laundry. Or, if you're lucky, tea. The water hits your skin like betrayal. You blink once. Your body considers rebellion. You push through. In 1942, the toilet isn't just a necessity, it's a battlefield. Between the plumbing, the freezing air, and the sandpaper pretending to be paper, every visit is a journey of endurance. You earn your place in history one flush at a time. Breakfast was a joke, and now lunch is also a joke, but with more beige. You open the pantry with hope and close it with a sigh. Inside, one tin of Spam, a quarter loaf of national bread, and a jar of something unlabeled that might once have been jam, chutney, or glue. The bread is dense, gray, and universally known as the national loaf, a wartime wonder made from wholemeal flour and moral superiority. It's nutritious, they say. If you enjoy chewing guilt, you saw a carrot yesterday on someone's hat, because when life gives you root vegetables, you wear them. You cut a slice of bread well, saw through it, and spread a tiny dab of margarine, which tastes like butter's distant cousin who only visits at funerals. There's no cheese today. Cheese is rationed to about 1 ounce a week, which means the entire family can experience the idea of cheese. If they all stand in a circle and smell it before passing it on, you decide to open the Spam with reverence. It's the meat of mystery, the gelatinous brick of dreams. The tin opens with a satisfying crank, revealing something pink, salty, and vaguely resentful. You slice it thin, paper thin, because ration coupons don't regenerate. Frying it would be glorious. But oil is rare and reserved for state occasions or fish fingers. You eat it cold. You pretend it's ham. You almost succeed. There's a Ministry of Food leaflet on the table. Food is a weapon. Don't waste it, it shouts. You nod. You lick your fork. You consider licking the leaflet. Then there's pudding. Not real pudding, wartime pudding, which is code for sweet thing made of hope, breadcrumbs, and deceit. Today's version is carrot fudge. It involves grated carrot, dried milk, and imagination. You chew. You smile. You die inside. Tea is the sacred ritual that binds the nation. You have 1 teaspoon of leaves left for the week. You reuse yesterday's bag. Again. It's more like a memory of tea, a whisper of tannin. You sip it anyway. With dignity. Because dignity is one of the few things not rationed. Milk reconstituted from powder, which is generous, considering it looks like paint and tastes like betrayal. Sugar, 1 spoonful per person per day if you're lucky. Your mom keeps hers hidden in a tin labeled buttons. You once found your dad licking a spoon in the shed. No one talks about it. Historians still argue whether rationing improved health due to enforced nutrition. They're probably right. But they weren't raised on dried eggs and disappointment toast. Sometimes. Your neighbor trades extra points for tinned peaches. Those are mythical rumored to cure depression and create temporary visions of summer. You saw one once. In 1941, behind glass, in a corner shop, it glowed like a relic. You glance at the ration book on the windowsill. The stamps are frayed. Every entry is checked. Every coupon clipped with surgical precision. Lose your book. And you might as well lose your soul. One kid on the block tried to forge a bacon stamp with pencil. He was banned from meat for a month. His family still whispers about it. The dog is begging. He gets scraps. But sometimes he gets more protein than you. You pretend you're not jealous. Dinner's already being plotted. It involves dried onions, mashed potato powder, and something called Woolton pie, which contains no meat and very little joy. Named after Lord Woolton, the Minister of Food. You imagine he's eaten actual pie. You imagine he has sugar. You finish lunch with a final crumb of bread and half a sip of tea, staring out the window at a gray sky and grayer rooftops. Somewhere. You hear a woman humming, "We'll meet again." You hum along. Not for Vera Lynn, but for cake. Someday, in 1942, Britain, you don't just eat. You ration. You improvise. You endure. And you learn. 1 gray loaf at a time. That hunger is just another form of patriotism. You get dressed for the outside world, which feels like preparing for a polite apocalypse. Your shirt has been patched so many times it could qualify as modern art. The buttons don't match. The sleeves are uneven. And there's a permanent ink stain on the collar from the day your pen exploded during a blackout drill. But it's the warmest one you've got. And no one's judging because they're wearing their own masterpieces of necessity. Your trousers are stiff with starch and survival. Utility clothing. They call it designed by the government to be practical, modest, and completely unflattering. No pleats, no frills, no fun. Everyone wears the same cuts, dull shades of brown, gray, or green, as if color itself has been rationed. You slip on your socks, mismatched wool tubes with more holes than material, and hope they hold through the walk to the shop. Your boots are heavy, with soles repaired 3 times using bits of tire and stubborn optimism. They're not waterproof. They're not warm, but they mostly keep your feet attached to your legs. And that's really all you can ask for in 1942. You throw on your coat. It's itchy, bulky, and originally made for someone twice your size. You think it used to be your uncle's, or a curtain, or both. The lining is coming loose, so you tuck it back in and pretend you meant to do that. This is fashion now. Outside, everyone looks the same. Not out of laziness, but because fashion is dictated by coupons, not couture. The clothing ration book allows only so many points per year. A man's shirt, 5 coupons. A pair of shoes, 7. A winter coat, 11. A second winter coat, hilarious. Historians still debate whether utility clothing was a triumph of equality or the death of personal expression. You suspect it's both. You haven't seen a polka dot in 3 years, and floral print is now a memory stored in your grandmother's attic. You pass a woman wearing a dress made from blackout curtain fabric. She's sewn it into a stylish A-line and dyed it with beetroot. You nod respectfully. That's wartime couture ingenuity, stitched with thread and desperation. There's a boy on the corner, wearing trousers clearly meant for someone older, taller, and wider. He's cinched them with a bit of rope. Fashion tip when belts are a luxury. String is the new black. Your scarf is knitted from scratchy, locally sourced wool, and designed by someone with questionable tension control. It's so long, it drags behind you like a wet noodle. But it's warm, and it was made by your nan during a Knit for Victory drive. So you wear it with pride and mild strangulation. You pass a shop window. Not a clothing shop, those are almost mythical, but a repair stand, displaying signs like invisible mending, shoe resold while you wait, and patchwork kits, new from old you. Peer inside and see a man sewing a new heel onto a boot with such focus. He might as well be performing surgery. At the bus stop, a woman complains her slip is now a blouse. Another man chuckles that he turned his late father's trousers into a waistcoat, and the leftover bits into oven mitts. You chuckle too. These are your people. In your pocket is a needle and thread, because you've learned that buttons are traitors, and seams burst when least expected. You've sewn on buses, in queues, in bomb shelters. A good hem can make the difference between being presentable and being publicly scolded by your mom. You remember, vaguely, what shopping for clothes used to be like. Now, you treasure hand-me-downs like sacred relics. That one friend with the American pen pal, she has nylons. Actual nylons. People whisper about her like she's royalty. Stockings are so rare that some girls draw lines down their calves with pencil to fake the seam. The illusion is thin, but illusions are all anyone has now. You trudge home with your scarf wrapped 3 times around your face, and your boots making that familiar wartime squelch. You're proud, you're tired, you're probably 42% wool at this point, but you're warm. And in 1942, Britain, that's practically a miracle. Your toothbrush stares at you from the tin mug on the windowsill. It's seen things. The bristles fan outward like a dandelion that gave up. It was once white. Now it's beige, with the soul of a broom and the ergonomics of a nail file. But it's yours. And you've been rationed one, yes. One this year. So you handle it like a museum piece and try not to blink too hard in its direction. Toothpaste, technically, it's in the form of a powder that comes in a little cardboard box, smells like chalk, and tastes like chalk. You dip your brush in the powder, gently tap off the excess so it doesn't burn your gums, and proceed to scrub like someone sanding furniture. You count the strokes, not because it helps, but because it's one of the few things in life you still have control over. No one talks about dental hygiene in 1942 because it's a sore subject, literally. The national diet is low in sugar. Yes, but it's also low in calcium, vitamins, and any sort of joy that might fortify your enamel. You chew hard bread, drink tea that stains, and snack on carrots that do nothing but mock your molars. You haven't seen an orange since 1940, and your teeth know it. Your mom sometimes mixes baking soda with a drop of peppermint oil. It was payday. That's luxury. On regular days, it's baking soda and guilt. On bad days, it's salt. Yes, salt. For exfoliating your gums and reminding you that wartime is, indeed, terrible for your mouth. Historians still debate whether oral health improved or declined during the war. Some say fewer sweets meant fewer cavities. Others say, you try brushing your teeth with a rock and optimism and see how that goes. Dentists, they exist somewhere, possibly in hiding. You know a boy down the street who had a tooth pulled by a man with a flask and a pair of pliers. No anesthetic, just a chair, a prayer, and a week off school. Lucky him, your own dentist, last seen in 1940, was called away to join the Army Dental Corps because apparently even soldiers deserve someone to shout, rinse, and spit before charging into battle. Since then, your teeth have become your responsibility, and it shows. Your gums feel tender, and molar aches when you breathe cold air. You chew on one side of your mouth like a guilty conspirator. But you smile anyway because rationed or not. Smiles are still free. Sort of. Mouthwash. Try rinsing with warm tea if it's left over. If not, there's always prayer. Or chewing mint if you can find one. You once found a mint under the dresser and chewed it for so long you gave it a name. Some people brush with soot. Real soot. From the fireplace. It's gritty. Yes. But it removes surface stains and any lingering attachment to taste buds. You tried it once. Once. You rinse your mouth with cold tap water. Clean. Blessedly, but the taste is always slightly metallic. Probably the old pipes. Or the ghosts of sweets past. You gargle like your grandparents taught you. And then stare into the mirror. You run your tongue across your teeth. Still there. For now. Your breath is acceptable. Not minty. Not catastrophic. Somewhere between distant cabbage and mild tea. You figure that's a win. You step back into the hallway, where your little brother is brushing with a toothbrush that used to be your dad's. You nod respectfully. Wartime sharing isn't about love, it's about logistics. Your mom is boiling water to clean the brushes later. It won't do much, but it helps with the illusion of hygiene. Sometimes, that's all you have. You tuck your powder box into the tin above the sink. One corner is chewed possibly by a rat, possibly by you during a sugar low. It's fine. You flash a grin in the mirror, one side slightly higher than the other. You're not cavity-free. You're not minty fresh. But you're still here. And in 1942, that's what survival looks like: yellowish, slightly sore, and smiling anyway. You check the clock. It's somehow 7:45 a.m., and also 100 years since breakfast. Time in wartime, Britain moves like treacle slow, sticky, and made mostly from substitute ingredients. You pull on your boots, still damp from yesterday's walk, and brace yourself for the day's true enemy labor without fuel, patience without rest, and queues without end. Your first stop, the greengrocer, or what's left of it. A single crate of wrinkled potatoes sits under a faded awning. The sign above reads, "We dig for victory, but what you're digging for is evidence of a vegetable." You join the queue, already 10 deep, full of people whispering rumors of a new cabbage shipment. It's not glamorous. It's survival cosplay. Your hands are cold. Your feet hurt. You clutch your ration book like a relic, fingers curled around the sacred stamps. If you lose it, you lose your right to queue, which means you lose your right to eat, which means you lose behind you. A woman with 4 kids and 1 eyebrow raises her voice. "Did you hear? Mrs. Peel got an extra tin of beans, said it was for the baby. But I saw her husband sneak it into the larder." You nod as if that's new information. You heard the same story last week. It's wartime tabloid gold. You finally reach the front. The grocer offers you 2 soft onions and a look of sympathy. You trade your coupon and walk away triumphant. 2 onions richer. A god among mortals. Historians still argue whether wartime queuing fostered community spirit or just made everyone silently hate each other. You believe in both. You once stood in line for 40 minutes to buy 1 bar of soap. You shared a joke with the woman ahead of you. Then she got the last bar. You haven't spoken since. You head to your part-time factory job. It's cold inside. So cold. Your breath fogs as you tighten bolts onto machines you only vaguely understand. You share gloves with the man next to you, swapping them between shifts like it's normal. It is. The machine's groan. The lights flicker. You can't feel your toes. You sip weak tea from a tin mug. You're sixth that week. And the only thing keeping your spirit from fossilizing. There's a small poster in the canteen. Careless talk costs lives. You sip in silence. The foreman yells something about quotas. You nod along. You have no idea what the quota is, but you'll meet it or fake it. You've become very efficient at looking busy. Back home, there's no break. Laundry must be done by hand, boiled in a kettle, stirred with a stick, wrung out with aching wrists. It's part chore, part CrossFit. You hang socks on the line, which droops like your spine. Your mum is in the kitchen, stirring a pan of mock shepherd's pie made from lentils, mashed turnip, and prayer. You mash potatoes like you're settling a personal grudge. This is how wars are won with rhythm and root vegetables. The kids are in the corner, peeling carrots again. They're also working. Everyone does something. If they're not in school, they're queuing, or knitting, or collecting scrap metal. Your youngest sister once brought home a bent bicycle pedal, like it was treasure. It was treasure. Evenings bring blackout routines, curtains drawn, radio tuned low, and the ritual of checking every crack for leaks of light. Then someone realizes there's no milk for tomorrow. And you're back out the door, chasing the last delivery like a wartime scavenger hunt. You pass by the pub. Laughter drifts out. You smile. You can't afford a pint, but the sound is enough. Somewhere, someone's managed to make one egg stretch into a sponge cake. Somewhere else, someone is darning socks by candlelight while listening to the BBC announce another town hit. You walk home in the dark, boots soaked, arms sore, but with half a cabbage in your bag and a little sugar tucked in your coat lining. It's contraband. You won't tell. In 1942, you worked, not just at your job, but at everything. You work to stay warm, you work to eat, you work to queue, you work to pretend you're not exhausted, and still, somehow you smile. It starts with a drip, just one. From the cracked seal of the living room window, then another, then a chorus. The rain has returned again with its usual flair for timing and subtle emotional damage. You pull your coat tighter and shift the bucket under the leak. This is your sixth weather bucket. You've named them all. This one's called Stanley. The thing about British weather in 1942 is that it doesn't stop. It just varies its attack. You get fog that chews on your eyebrows, drizzle that soaks your soul, and wind that sneaks down your collar like a nosy uncle. Then, when you least expect it, sun for 2 minutes, just long enough to dry half a sock. Your house, like many, is a war veteran in its own right. It creaks, it sighs, it leaks from angles that defy physics. The walls are so damp, they have opinions. You once saw a mushroom growing behind the wardrobe. It was thriving. You step into your boots, which are still soggy from yesterday. Inside, the newspaper you stuffed for insulation has turned into a pulp of headlines and regret. You wear them anyway. Your coat, that noble relic from Section 5, is trying its best, but the sleeves are absorbing water, like it's a competition. Outside, the air smells like wet concrete and boiled cabbage, a local specialty. The wind snaps your scarf into your face as if to remind you who's in charge. You trudge forward. It's a squelch with every step kind of day. Winter, it means sleeping in everything you own. Summer, just slightly warmer rain. You've accepted that your drying line is decorative, and your socks will forever be damp in the middle. You've also accepted that warm weather is a government rumor designed to boost morale. You've tried to light the coal fire, but it's a one-match miracle on most days. You nurse the flames like a newborn, crouched in front of it whispering, "Please, please, just this once." When it catches, The whole family huddles like moths. If not, you spend the evening doing a sad impression of a potato in a cold stew. Historians still argue whether British morale held steady because of community resilience or shared trauma. You believe it's because everyone was too cold to rebel. Also, hot tea makes a fine anesthetic. You glance at the sky. It's not raining now, just considering it. You make a break for the shop 2 blocks down, dodging puddles like landmines. On the way, you see Mr. Langley shoveling coal dust into a paper sack with a spoon. You nod. It's a mood. In summer, you open the window and immediately regret it. The heat turns your room into a bread oven, but with fewer nice smells and more wasps. You sweat into your sheets, which cling like betrayal. No fans. Of course. You wave an envelope over your face until your wrist gives out and call it engineering. In winter, you layer everything scarves, jumpers, knitted horrors from relatives. You resemble a woolen sculpture, one sneeze away from collapse. Your breath fogs the inside of your own spectacles. There's frost on the toilet seat. You scream internally. At school, kids bring their coats inside, not to show off, to survive. The blackboard is cold to the touch. Pens freeze mid-word. The only warm spot is near the teacher's kettle. And that's guarded like a national secret. Laundry never dries. Ever. The kitchen clothesline sags with socks, knickers, and towels that have achieved permanently damp status. Sometimes, you rotate them for fun. Other times, you cry and put them back on. It's not fashion. It's desperation. You once tried sleeping with a hot water bottle made from an old gin bottle. It leaked. You didn't mind. At least it was warm. The weather is not your enemy. It's your moody flatmate. Unpredictable, expensive, and constantly in your personal space. You've learned to whisper curses at the sky in the same tone you use for burnt toast. Tonight, the wind picks up. The blackout curtains billow like ghosts with grievances. You tuck your jumper tighter, pull your sleeves over your hands, and smile weakly. Because in wartime Britain, weather isn't just weather. It's a character, and it always steals the scene. The taps wheeze, and then finally, reluctantly, deliver a thin stream of water that smells slightly of tin and boiled pipe. You hold your breath, count to 5, and begin filling the kettle not for tea. Of course, that luxury passed 2 hours ago, but for the weekly bath, yes, weekly, because you're British. It's wartime, and warm water is liquid gold with attitude. The tub is in the kitchen, a squat tin basin that doubles as a laundry station and occasionally a place to pickle root vegetables. You pour the water in carefully, watching steam rise like a miracle. This is the 3rd kettle you've boiled. It will take 6, 7, if you want to feel your legs. The house rule is eldest child bathes first, youngest last, and whoever finishes early gets the cleanest towel, which is also the driest shirt. You go second, which means the water's still mostly transparent, mostly. You step in. It's lukewarm, and the bottom is gritty with coal dust. You sink in slowly, like someone apologizing to their ancestors. The warmth hits your knees, then your spirit. You close your eyes and allow yourself 2 minutes of bliss. You imagine the sea, a swimming pool, a hotel with running water and soap that hasn't been rationed since 1940. Then you accidentally bump the metal tub with your elbow. And remember, you're still in your kitchen, sharing bathwater with 3 other people and a sponge that retired years ago. Soap, a stub. It's so small you use it like a pencil, tracing suds onto your limbs. Shampoo is a dream instead. You use grated soap or on brave days, a rinse of beer if someone spilled a pint. You lather your hair and hope your scalp forgives you. It won't. Historians still argue whether wartime cleanliness standards actually improved due to heightened public health campaigns. There were posters, Yes, cleanliness is courage. Keep the nation fit. But they didn't mention the part where you had to boil 6 kettles and arm wrestle a cousin for the clean end of the flannel. Once you're out, you towel off with something that resembles a dish rag. You feel cleaner, slightly. You feel steamed, a bit. You feel proud. You didn't faint this time. The water is poured into the garden to help the soil, which is code for nowhere else to put it. Your siblings cheerfully argue about who gets to go next. You smirk. The water's yours for now. Drinking water is cleaner than the bath variety. Thank heavens. It comes from the tap and tastes fine, unless you notice the bits floating in it. You don't? Not anymore. You remember the time the pipes froze in 40. You chipped ice out of the bucket just to wash your face. You cried, not from cold, but from knowing that this was the normal. Laundry is done by hand, with boiled water and whatever soap you can forage from the corners of the dish tin. Clothes are scrubbed, beaten, and dried on a line above the stove, dripping into your evening stew. You eat it anyway. There's a rumor that someone in the next village has running hot water. You assume they're royalty, or lying. Your mum boils the kettle again, this time for dishes. She hums softly. A neighbor knocks and asks to borrow the washing up bowl. You lend it. Tomorrow, you'll need her scrubbing brush. This is how currency works now. You brush your teeth again with the chalky powder and rinse with the same cup you used for tea 3 hours ago. It's fine. Everything is fine. Your hands are dry, cracked, and permanently scented with damp wool and wartime stew. You smear some goose fat on them, or margarine. It's all the same now. You wrap them in socks to keep the moisture in. Finally, you sit down, warmish, cleanish. You made it through another day, another queue, another drizzle, another basin of semi-questionable water. You look around the kitchen. Tin bath now hanging behind the door. Kettle cooling on the stove. A single clean cup on the table. The silence is soft, and the house creaks in approval, because in 1942, Britain, water isn't just something you use, it's something you earn. And today, you earned it. Now the taps are silent. The kettle's empty. The fire has faded into soft embers, and your breath clouds faintly in the still kitchen air. Your arms are warm from the bath, your hair damp against your collar, and your heart just a little slower than before. You stretch beneath your wool blankets, the scratchy fabric now a small comfort rather than a nuisance. The walls creak. The blackout curtains flutter in the evening draft, but your house feels quieter tonight, not just from the end of chores, but from the stillness that comes with survival. No sirens, no cues, no leaks. For now. Just you. Resting. Breathing. Warmish. Cleanish. Safe-ish. And in a world of coupons, kettles, and powdered dreams, those 3 things are enough. Let your eyes grow heavy now. Let the sound of a sleepy street and distant kettles humming fade into the softest nothing, because you've done enough. You've made it. Good night. Homefront hero, now. We begin in that familiar dream-like fog, when you've just slipped beneath the surface of sleep, but your mind decides to take a detour through myth, animal husbands, and possibly the worst in-laws in literature. In tonight's tale, you're not just reading about strange marriages. You're in one. You would never think that wedding vows might include phrases like, "Do you promise not to shed feathers in bed?" or "Till scale do us part?" But here we are. Your spouse might hiss, neigh, or carry a magical cloak that controls their mood and mobility. And you're just trying not to mess it up before breakfast. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere, particularly romantic, say, next to your pet iguana, drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes and realize your wedding bed is made of moss and mystery. There are feathers on the pillow, and you're not entirely sure they came from the blanket. Across the room, if you can call a ring of glowing mushrooms a room your bride or groom blinks with something ancient in their eyes. They are not entirely human, but they are yours. And this is not a fairy tale. This is a folkloric legal contract with conditions, loopholes, and the constant possibility of accidental transformation in cultures across the world. Stories of humans marrying animals, or more accurately, beings who shift between human and animal, are more common than you'd expect, and in Norse and Indian legends especially. These tales are less about romance and more about survival, symbolism, and spectacle. You are never just in love. You're usually in trouble. These tales serve many functions. Some warn you against breaking promises. Others explain the unexplainable, why swans fly in pairs, why snakes guard treasure, why your weird uncle still talks to goats. But almost all of them use animal-human marriage as a test of your patience, of your moral backbone, and of your ability to accept a spouse with hooves. In Norse myth, shapeshifters are everywhere. That friendly stranger might be a god in disguise. That majestic swan might be a Valkyrie, or your wife. You're rarely told until it's already complicated. Indian mythology, on the other hand, takes a more elemental approach. The divine and the animal are intertwined. Naga serpents, buffalo demons. Talking cows, they don't ask for your approval. They demand your reverence, or your hand in marriage. Both cultures offer a unique lens into how ancient people tried to explain emotional entanglements using the natural world. You know, instead of therapy, they had magical pacts with shape-shifting spouses, and these unions weren't always willing. In fact, some are more like mythical hostage situations with love added in later like seasoning. In others, the animal partner is the wiser one, patiently waiting for the human to stop being a moron and learn the rules. Yes, there are rules. Lots of them. Don't light a fire after sunset. Never peek while your snake spouse sleeps. Keep your hands off the enchanted bridle. It's basically a prenup written by a committee of trickster gods and dream logic. Historians still argue whether these stories were coded social commentary about arranged marriage, gender roles, or spiritual beliefs about animals and their moral purity. Some say they reflect old fertility rites. Others suggest they were simply meant to keep kids out of the woods at night. Because nobody wants to end up hitched to a crocodile goddess with abandonment issues. So, you sit now in your mossy bed, married to someone with feathers or fangs. You signed no papers. There were no vows. But folklore has decided you are one half of a very unusual couple. And your new in-laws may arrive at any moment, probably riding a goat or appearing through a puddle. Good luck. Your morning begins with the soft thud of hooves outside your window, or what you assume is a window, considering you live in a tree now. Not metaphorically. A literal tree, hollowed out and enchanted. The kind of place that never needs sweeping, because the squirrels handle it. You stretch, or try to, only to find your animal spouse curled around you, half wolf at the moment, snoring gently. This, you're learning, is normal. It's also non-negotiable in Norse legends. It's common for humans to accidentally end up in relationships with supernatural beings disguised as animals. The trick is, they don't usually tell you up front. One day you rescue a swan with an arrow in its wing, and the next day, she's bathing in a forest pool, takes off her swan cloak, and surprise, you're soulbound until further notice. She might agree to marry you, but only if you never touch the cloak. And you, of course, immediately forget that part within a week. You don't even mean to disobey, but curiosity wins. You peek. You hide the cloak. You think, maybe if she forgets she was ever a bird, she'll stay. Spoiler, she does not. In Norse stories, the swan maiden always leaves, and usually with your heart, your luck, and sometimes your best sword. It's like a magical version of ghosting, but with more feathers and consequences. Daily life with such a partner is a test of trust and routine. You might be asked to fetch water from a well that only appears when the moon hits the lake just right, or prepare a meal of acorns, nettles, and the dreams of foxes. You don't question it, mostly because asking too many questions results in your spouse turning back into a seal and swimming away forever. Historians still argue whether these marriages symbolize the fleeting nature of happiness or the tension between civilization and wilderness. Others suggest they were metaphors for seasonal cycles. Spring arrives, love blossoms, winter returns, and your beloved migrates south in her swan form, leaving you with a broken heart and several eggs to raise alone. But what's never in dispute is the emotional instability. One moment your spouse is serenading you in perfect Old Norse. The next, they're chasing rabbits on all fours. There's no manual. There are only runes, riddles, and the constant feeling that someone's watching from the woods. Of course, you're not the only one having a complicated day. In many of these tales, your partner is equally trapped. She never asked to be turned into a swan. She never asked to fall in love with someone who sleeps in until noon and forgets to oil the door hinges. Her world is one of transformation, and you're just another twist in her myth. In one particularly obscure Icelandic folktale, a man marries a seal woman who sheds her skin to dance under the moon. He hides her skin, thinking he's won a bride. She stays for 7 years, bears him children, even teaches him to fish better. But the day she finds her sealskin again, she puts it on, kisses her children goodbye, and returns to the sea. No argument, no drama, just one final wave with a webbed hand. Your breakfast, by the way, is probably cold porridge made by forest spirits who resent you for taking up space. You thank them anyway. Because in this household, gratitude might be the only thing standing between you and a sudden transformation into moss. You decide to spend the afternoon doing something normal. Maybe weaving a basket. Maybe collecting firewood. Maybe figuring out how to tell your in-laws, who happen to be dear, about your job situation. You've been between sagas for a while now. It's not easy being a mortal in a family full of shapeshifters with ancient powers and vague opinions about your worthiness. In Norse mythology, the family of your supernatural spouse is rarely just background decoration. They're active participants in your life, often appearing at random intervals with riddles, tests, or obscure complaints about the state of your roof moss. And heaven forbid you forget to bow properly to your father-in-law, who is technically a thunder elk and can summon storms with his hooves. That'll ruin your picnic plans. You're invited to a family gathering, except gathering is generous. It's more like a trial. Around a stone table carved with symbols, no one translates for you. Your spouse's relatives arrive: an aunt who's a hawk, a cousin who can only speak through riddles, and an uncle who's half stag and fully judgmental. They demand to know why you're not yet initiated into the ancient rituals of bark chewing and night singing. You try to explain that you grew up in a fishing village with no magical traditions, but they just blink slowly, like you've insulted their ancestral glacier. One particularly weird tradition: you're expected to gift each family member an offering based on their hybrid form. A snake woman gets warm stones. A fox lord gets fermented berries. The uncle stag, he prefers finely combed grass and tales of your dreams. You didn't bring anything, so you awkwardly offer a song you remember from childhood. They listen. It's off-key. Still, it's accepted, mostly out of pity. Historians still argue whether these animal-human marriage myths were symbolic of tribal alliances or coded lessons in managing difference. Marrying a non-human might reflect the tension between settled people and the wild world forests. rivers, and instincts that can't be reasoned with. Others claim they functioned as cautionary tales fall in love outside your kin, and you might end up arguing with a badger about bedtime rituals. Later that night, your partner explains that her cousin, the riddle-speaking Raven Boy, actually liked your song. He said it reminded him of wind over wet stones. You nod. You pretend to understand. You're learning to measure success in incomprehensible metaphors now. Also, in how often your spouse does not fly off in a storm of feathers. Quirky tidbit. There's one Norse tale where a woman is cursed to become a bear every time someone says her name. Imagine how that wedding went. I, Eric, take you. Gror. She ends up living in a cave and only returns to her husband in spring, assuming he hasn't accidentally said her name while yelling at the chickens. Meanwhile, you curl up beside your animal spouse, who's now part mist, part moonlight. She whispers something ancient and probably poetic into your ear. You think it's, "I love you," but it could also be, "Don't forget the pine sap offering next week." Either way, you hum a reply, hoping it fits. And the wind outside rustles in what might be approval, or polite confusion. You wake to the sound of scratching. Not claws, thankfully, but quills on parchment. Your spouse, still wearing the faint shimmer of fox fur along her shoulders, is writing out a treaty, or possibly a poem, with mythic beings. It's hard to tell. In this house, literature is a blood sport, and breakfast conversation requires footnotes. Today, if you're visiting the village, you need barley, salt, and something called sky honey, which you learn is just dew, harvested at dawn by moth women monks. The market is bustling. But you notice something peculiar. You're being watched. Not in the celebrity couple way, but in the, "Isn't that the one who married a heron" kind of way. You smile. You wave. You quietly regret leaving the house. Among Norse legends, such as those from the poetic Edda, humans married to animal spirits often found themselves in limbo between two social spheres. You don't quite belong with mortals anymore, but the immortals think you smell too much like soup. You are, in short, unplaceable. One account even describes a man marrying a swan maiden, only to be exiled from his village because the local priest declared their union structurally unstable. Whatever that means. You barter with a vendor who claims to be half wolf, half weaver. He offers you a piece of cloth that shifts color based on your emotions. It turns gray when you touch it. Melancholy, he says, nodding sagely. You buy it, mostly out of social pressure. The next stall sells owl eggs and prophecy spoons. You pick a spoon that promises moderate clarity and occasional trembling, which feels honest. One of the more absurd legends you recall involves a man who marries a cow goddess. She gives him 7 sons and a cow that never runs dry. Things go well until he forgets to thank her at a harvest festival. She turns into a whirlwind and moos a curse so powerful it echoes in fjords to this day. Historians still argue whether this tale is about reverence for nature or simply a reminder to never skip anniversaries. At the village well, an old woman pulls you aside. She whispers that she, too, once married a crane, elegant dancer, terrible cook. She sighs. Then she hands you a feather and vanishes into mist. You add the feather to your pouch, which already contains 1 fox tooth, 2 promises, and a chunk of sky honey wrapped in regret. Back home, your spouse is lounging in a shaft of afternoon light, polishing a scale you suspect came from her dragon days. She asks how the market went. You say it was mildly surreal, with excellent spoons. She laughs, and for a moment, the air smells like pine and melted frost. There's an old Norse belief that love between worlds requires daily tending, like a fire that burns in a blizzard. Some myths suggest that such unions were tests from the gods. Others say they were metaphors for internal transformation, marrying the wild to soothe the self. Or maybe people just really like the idea of talking foxes. You sit together, watching the wind comb the trees. Her tail brushes your arm. You think about dinner and whether sky honey pairs well with moss bread. But mostly, you think about staying just one more night where riddles make sense and love doesn't need matching species to feel real. Tonight, the moon hangs low like a gossiping ant, full and unblinking. Your spouse insists it's a good omen. You're less sure, mostly because you're about to meet the in-laws. Or, to be precise, her family of shape-shifting cloud tigers, storm crows, and one allegedly reformed swamp demon with a talent for embroidery. You've dressed for the occasion silk tunic, lucky charm tucked under your collar, breath laced with mint leaves, but you're keenly aware that you're the only one here who can't breathe fire, vanish into vapor, or communicate via psychic pollen. Dinner is at a hilltop shrine that wasn't there yesterday. It's only accessible when you're emotionally centered. Your spouse says, you're not, but you fake it well enough to get in. The greeting is warm, in the way lava is warm, scalding, beautiful, and likely to burn off your eyebrows if you linger too long. You're hugged by an aunt who is part barn owl and entirely judgmental. The appetizer is fermented lightning. You swallow it. Your soul hiccups. Among Indian folk epics, marriages between humans and divine or animal hybrids were not just tolerated, they were celebrated as cosmic alignments. Think of Nala and Damayanti. She's a mortal princess. He's a semi-divine being with talking animal friends and a habit of turning invisible when anxious. Their love story is one of separation, despair, and magical pigeons. Historians still argue whether these tales were romantic ideals or just creative loopholes to justify cousin marriage with flair. Back at dinner, the conversation turns to your potential as a hybrid facilitator. You nod, pretending to know what that means. Someone asks if you've learned dream language yet. You lie, almost fluent. A cousin with hair made of moss offers you a side dish called Memory of Mango, which tastes like your best summer from childhood. It's unsettling. After dessert, a fog you inhale. Rather than chew, you're summoned to the elders' circle. This is either a blessing or a soft trial. One of the uncles, possibly part cobra, asks you what your intentions are. You say something heartfelt about love, connection, and shared laundry responsibilities. A grandmother, half cloud, half judge, leans in and whispers, "He'll do." In Norse sagas, the test of the human partner often involved surviving a feast without fainting, offending the gods, or turning into a tree. You make it through with only minor social injuries. Someone curses in a dialect only raccoons understand. You smile anyway. As the gathering ends, your spouse kisses you on the cheek and says, they like you, or at least, they no longer want to dissolve you. Progress. On the walk home, the moon follows you like a nosy neighbor. You step over roots that whisper unsolicited advice. You consider how bizarre your life has become, and how oddly right it feels. In myth and in marriage, the lesson is the same. Love doesn't need to make sense. It just needs to hold steady, even when everyone at the table glows faintly and thinks your best feature is mammalian modesty. You reach the threshold. The door welcomes you with a sigh of incense and warm wood. Inside, your bed waits a nest of silk, feathers, and maybe a stray claw. You lie down next to the only person who thinks you're strange. Fragile humanness is beautiful. Sleep is for the ordinary. Tonight, you're attending a wedding in a forest that doesn't technically exist. You're not the bride or groom. You're not even on the guest list. But your presence is required, because in this particular legend, guests are part of the ritual, not for ceremony, for transformation. One moment, you're seated under a banyan tree, sipping rosewater. The next, you're being sized up by a golden antelope with the voice of a disappointed uncle. In Indian mythology, forests aren't just backgrounds. They're breathing entities, full of whispering leaves, rebirth, and creatures who might offer marriage proposals if the moonlight hits your face just right. You spot a couple reciting vows, she, a radiant forest nymph. He, a scholar who accidentally insulted a sacred cow and got cursed into marriage. They look happy, mostly. He's holding a garland of orchids that appears to be slowly eating his wrist. Love hurts. The officiant is a banyan spirit whose eyebrows are birds. His speech is short. Love is chaos. Endure it well. Applause from the trees. You try to clap politely. A nearby shrub claps back. In Norse tales, the setting shifts fjords, caves, and icy ridges where weddings involve long-winded riddles and aggressive toasting. There's the saga of a man who marries a sea otter woman, only to find that her dowry includes a haunted fishing net and a debt owed to a glacier. Historians still argue whether these marriages were symbolic metaphors for human nature balance or just early attempts at avoiding village gossip. Back in the forest, the reception begins. You're offered snacks made of moonlight, regret, and candied lotus root. A pair of twin jackal groomsmen do synchronize dance rituals involving feathers and sarcasm. You're invited to join. You decline. They nod solemnly, then bite your shoe. A human-animal marriage might seem romantic in theory, passion beyond species, love beyond reason, but it's rarely smooth. There's always a condition: don't peek, don't ask, don't remove the sealskin or the feather cloak. And of course, everyone always does. Curiosity, humanity's most consistent wedding gift and curse. You wander deeper into the trees. You find a side wedding much less formal. A frog king is marrying a rain cloud. Their guests are mostly amphibians and weather. It's oddly moving. The vows are croaked. The kiss is thunder. And the party favors are bits of wet moss shaped like hearts. You sit down. The ground breathes. Somewhere. Drums begin slow, soft, made of bone and bark. This is the moment the forest decides whether you belong. It doesn't matter that you didn't bring a gift. You've stayed. You've witnessed. You've not laughed when someone's mother turned into a giant butterfly mid-toast. Eventually, a firefly lands on your hand. It flashes once. That's the sign you're free to leave. But also, you're now part of the story. That's how these legends work. No one escapes unchanged. And as you walk away, the forest closes behind you like a book that may one day reopen. Your shoes are muddy, your heart a little quieter, your soul just slightly more amphibian. By now, you've seen enough unions between mortals and beasts to understand the pattern: love, mystery, betrayal, and at least one transformative haircut. But tonight's tale is different. You're not just observing. You're expected to participate in what appears to be a ceremonial reenactment of a wedding between a mortal woman and a divine horse. Yes, you read that right. And no, there's no escape. The doors have melted. This scene comes courtesy of Indian legend, specifically from the Mahabharata's endless encyclopedia of complications. King Hayagriva, the horse-headed avatar of Vishnu, isn't just divine. He's also romantic, terrifying, and cursed with the eternal scent of sandalwood and lightning. In one version, a princess prays for a husband as strong as the wind and as wise as the sun. She gets Hayagriva, who speaks in Sanskrit and whinnies during emotional moments. You're now playing the role of the curious guest, which means your job is to ask a dangerous question halfway through the ritual. Something like, is that mene made of real fire? The priest shushes you. The horse god snorts. The incense starts to smell like burnt promises. Historians still argue whether this marriage is meant to symbolize divine knowledge, obedience to cosmic order, or just a really awkward attempt at conveying transcendental romance through livestock. Some say the horse form represents purification and speed. Others say it's an elaborate prank the gods are still laughing about. In Norse lore, we stumble into a darker tale, one involving the trickster god Loki, who, in a truly overcommitted attempt to sabotage a construction contract, transforms into a mare and seduces a stallion named Svadilfari. The result, an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir, whom Odin eventually adopts as his steed. No wedding, just implications. You blink. You try to forget. You fail. Back at the Indian ceremony, the bride wears marigolds. The groom nibbles grass. The marriage contract is etched on palm leaves and signed with a gust of wind. You're handed a blessing in the form of a riddle. What walks on 4 legs in dreams, speaks in silence, and remembers you before you are born. You nod thoughtfully. You have no idea. But the horse god seems pleased. He gifts you a lock of flaming mane. You're supposed to keep it in your left sock for spiritual Wi-Fi. The dance begins. It's circular, like time, like destiny, like a giant spinning metaphor you don't fully understand. The music is hoofbeats and hymns, layered with chanting so ancient it predates vowels. You're swept into the rhythm, twirling among others, some human, some hooved, all bound by whatever dream logic powers this place. You begin to understand, at least emotionally, what this marriage is about. Not passion, not drama, but surrender. You don't marry a divine horse because you want to ride off into the sunset. You marry him because the universe has a terrible sense of humor and your fate was sealed 5 lifetimes ago during a meteor shower. At last, the ceremony ends. The guests vanish into clouds. The bride and groom dissolve into light. You're left holding the riddle, the mane, and the unmistakable sense that you've just witnessed a story meant to be forgotten by morning. But you won't forget. And that, perhaps, is the real wedding gift. You try to sit down, but the ground beneath you is moss. Not the nice, plush kind you see in fairy tales. No, this moss sighs, and shifts, and mutters something in Old Norse, because you've wandered into a saga again. Specifically, the one where men marry swan women. Yes, actual swans, with cloaks, and commitment issues. They're called Valkyries in some stories, swan maidens in others. Either way, they have wings, serious boundary issues, and a tendency to fall in love with the first man who steals their feather cloak. You'd think that would raise red flags, especially since these cloaks are essentially their entire identity. But no, in legend, theft is apparently the sincerest form of courtship. You observe a familiar pattern unfold. A hunter finds a bathing maiden. He hides her cloak. She begs for it. He says, "Only if you marry me." Romantic. Right. Historians still argue whether this is symbolic of male dominance in courtship rituals or just a really aggressive form of hide and seek. Either way, the wedding happens. She cooks. He brags. Everything is perfect until she finds the cloak again. And you can probably guess what happens next. Feathers, flight, abandonment. He's left yelling into the treetops, holding a half-eaten leg of venison and wondering where it all went wrong. Now, you shift your focus to Indian mythology again, because you're multilingual in your mythological trauma. This time, we meet Salabanjika, the celestial tree nymph, half woman, half spirit of fertility, beauty incarnate. She leans against a tree like she invented gravity. Sometimes she's just part of sculpture. Sometimes she steps down, brushing her hair with fingers made of moonlight, and marries a mortal. Temporarily, always temporarily, in one version. She comes to life to help a noble king find wisdom. In another, she's cursed to walk the earth until someone builds her a temple. Either way, the man who finds her is smitten. He always is. You notice a trend: these stories are never from her point of view. We hear about her healing presence, soothing gaze, and divine patience, but never once do we hear her say, "Actually, I'd prefer to go back to being part of a tree. Thanks." Comic paradox. Of course, the divine woman who needs a mortal man to complete her, as if lightning needs a flashlight. Now, scholars sometimes try to spin this positively. They say, Swan maiden represents the soul, and the man is just trying to unify spirit and flesh. Sure, but it still feels like someone got married under false pretenses and didn't read the part of the vows that said, "Until cloak do us part." Back in your dream moss clearing, a girl made of bird feathers and honeycomb smiles at you. She offers a cup of something that smells like thunder and tastes like regret. You drink. You sprout feathers. Not metaphorically. Your arms itch. Your ribs creak. There's a swan cloak at your feet. You hesitate. You look up. The sky is wide. The wind is persuasive. You pick it up anyway. And just like that, you're no longer sure if you're the one stealing the cloak or the one about to fly away. By now, you've accepted that mythological marriage is less about romance and more about strange contracts, transformation clauses, and mysterious disappearances. So you're not exactly surprised when the final chapter in this parade of peculiar unions begins with a horse. Not just any horse, this one is Sleipnir. Yes, the eight-legged horse of Norse legend, born not from love, but from a prank gone entirely too far. You brace yourself, because the mother of this horse, Loki, in female form, after shape-shifting into a mare to seduce a stallion in ancient Rome, reconciliations were less floral and more transactional. If the husband chose to forgive his wife, he had to publicly state that she had repented and taken a moral bath metaphorically, not literally, because Roman hygiene had its own issues. But there was a catch: the woman's father might lose legal claims to her dowry, depending on who forgave whom and how public the admission was. So, reconciling wasn't just about feelings. It was real estate negotiation disguised as moral maturity. Public the admission was. It wasn't just about feelings. It was real estate negotiation maturity. Still, reconciliation had its perks, mainly not getting exiled, executed, or forced to wear symbolic cabbage on your chest. Back in the village, you watch as the couple walks home from the ritual bed. Procession, a little too stiffly, as if both are dying from secondhand embarrassment. Children giggle, grandmothers shake their heads, and someone's already carving the event into the church bench for posterity. Procession. Grandmothers shake their... Someone's already carving the event into the church bench for posterity. Event into the church bench. In this final drift of your dream, a question bubbles up. What is it we're trying to marry? Really, the divine, the wild, the unknown? Or are these stories just a long-winded way of saying humans are lonely and sometimes project way too hard onto forest creatures? Historians still argue whether these tales are warnings, fantasies, or half-remembered ritual echoes. You simply nod off wrapped in feathers, fins, and folklore. The myths don't end. But you, thankfully, do. Now the wind's quiet. The swan maiden folds her wings. The crocodile sinks into still water, and Sleipnir stops galloping, just long enough for you to exhale. You've drifted through forests, under oceans, across skies with eight-legged horses and divine marriages that made absolutely no logistical sense, but somehow, it all fits together. A bedtime lullaby whispered in the languages of legend. The cloaks are hung, the feathers settle, the gods, the beasts, the brides, they all dim down into silence. You're safe now. No wedding contracts to sign. No symbolic unions to decipher. Just the slow rhythm of breath and myth fading together. Sleep comes not with a bang, but with a feather landing softly on moss. Close your eyes and dream of weddings you'll never have to attend. Now, we descend into a place that smells faintly of sheep, rye porridge, and poorly buried secrets. Your average medieval village. You would never think that cheating on your spouse could result in horn hats, public pig chases, and improvised morality plays. But here we are. The good news, you're technically still alive. The bad news, your neighbors saw you sneak behind the bakehouse with the blacksmith's widow, and now you're community property. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I'd love to know what corner of the world we're dozing off in together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in a thatched roof cottage, in a bed made of straw and domestic regret. Chickens wander in and out like they own the place, which, spiritually, they do. Word is already spreading through the narrow, muddy lanes. Someone's been unfaithful, and it might be you, or your neighbor, or the local Reeves daughter, in a village of 50 people and 0 secrets. You could sneeze near someone else's spouse, and it'd be written in the moral ledger by dawn. Cheating isn't just a sin here. It's a spectator sport. The village doesn't have Netflix. It has you and your very poor life decisions. People gossip at the communal well, fingers pointing, theories flying. He was seen slipping into Maud's barn, someone says, while another swears on their goat's grave that it was the priest who looked guilty. Children carry whispers like medieval couriers of chaos. Nothing escapes the surveillance of bored peasants with too much hay and not enough privacy. The church, predictably, gets involved. Because nothing screams repentance like being summoned to kneel on cold stone while a robed man shouts biblical threats at your forehead. If you're lucky, you'll be told to fast for a week. If you're less lucky, they'll get creative. One common punishment, being forced to crawl through town with a sign around your neck that says something like, "I lay with a stranger. Now, I lie with the shame." All while livestock look on with what you can only assume is judgment. And remember, it's not just the cheater who gets humiliated. Sometimes the whole couple is paraded around. In some regions, a wronged husband might be made to carry his cheating wife through the streets as a symbol of forgiveness. Symbolic, yes. Dignified, not even slightly. Historians still argue whether these punishments were rooted in moral enforcement or just a brilliant excuse to break up the agricultural monotony. Imagine hoeing barley all morning and then being told, "Quick, Ethel's being shamed for kissing the cooper. Bring your clogs and a turnip for the crowd." One documented fringe punishment, being tethered to a pig and forced to oink your confession. You read that right, because nothing says redemption like competitive livestock imitation. And if you think noblemen were spared, think again. In small villages, everyone's dirty laundry, literal and metaphorical, was scrubbed in the same freezing stream. Nobility might dodge certain punishments, but not rumors. A philandering baron might end up in ballads sung by shepherds. Yes, cheating could make you immortal, in a folk song that rhymes mistress with blisters. So you shuffle through your day, wondering if your romantic misstep will earn you a stern sermon, a donkey ride, facing backward, or a catchy new nickname. Welcome to the village, where your love life is the main attraction, and justice smells vaguely like goat droppings. You're hoping for a quiet market morning, maybe buy a few turnips. Avoid any public humiliation, but the moment you step outside, it's clear today is a spectacle. Someone's been caught, again. And not just anyone, Edric, the miller, who until now had only ever cheated people out of flour. Not fidelity, but apparently, Edric has been grinding more than grain. And now, the town is assembling with all the moral enthusiasm of a pious mob and the wardrobe of a cabbage vendor. Public punishment in medieval villages wasn't exactly subtle. The tool of choice. The cucking stool, basically a wooden chair mounted on a lever and dunked in the river, used to punish scolds, nags, and adulterers, which basically meant anyone who annoyed someone in authority. Today, Edric gets the honor. He's strapped in like a soggy prize ham and dipped repeatedly into water that looks like it could birth frogs with postgraduate degrees. You watch as people cheer, toss turnips, and pretend this is justice and not a deeply entertaining break from thatching roofs. Someone's aunt is already narrating events like it's a play. Look at his face. That's the look of sin, stewed in regret, she declares, full of pride and half a flask of ale. It's important to note, medieval punishments weren't really about correction. They were about display, about showing others what happens when you prioritize your love life over local grain quotas and arranged marriages. This was medieval reality TV. The ratings very high. The prizes, humiliation, and possibly a bladder infection. Meanwhile, Roman cities had a different strategy. Less turnip throwing, more law and contract drama. Cheating was considered a personal betrayal and a legal violation. Roman husbands could legally kill their wives' lovers so long as the affair happened under their own roof. You read that right. In ancient Rome. Infidelity law was a fun little mix of domestic boundaries and conditional manslaughter. Historians still argue whether this was to uphold moral values or just a convenient loophole to settle scores with rivals. But the Romans also loved a good inscription. Cheating scandals sometimes made it onto tombstones or walls. One surviving example describes a woman who was chaste. Except on Tuesdays, you can almost hear the stonecutter judging silently with every tap of his chisel. And then there were the masks, literal wooden masks forced onto accused women, sometimes carved with long noses or animal features. A cheating wife might be made to wear a pig mask and sit in the market square, symbolizing her moral transformation into livestock. This wasn't just punishment. It was branding. It said, buy onions here. But don't forget that love is dangerous and pigs are forever. Back in the village, Edric emerges from his final dunk, drenched and redeemed-ish. The crowd disperses. Children mimic his soggy waddle, and a few people already wonder who'll be next. Because the truth is, people cheat. And in a time with no texting, no Netflix, and no personal space, romantic drama was the closest thing to modern entertainment. So, you return home, not quite reassured. Your turn might come, or you'll be forced to throw turnips at someone else's shame parade. Either way, the next scandal is always simmering and the village already smells like smoke and anticipation. You're walking through town hoping for quiet. But of course, today is court day, which means the entire square smells like anticipation, baked dirt, and the distinct moral superiority of people who definitely have secrets of their own. At the center of the square is the punishment post, and tied to it, a man with his pants still on, but not his dignity. He's been accused of adultery, which in this case doesn't just mean sneaking off with someone else's spouse. It means violating a social contract that involves goats, dowries, and the shared ownership of 2 goats and a plow. Today's punishment shaming, the theatrical sibling of justice. And it starts with charivari. You've never heard a sound quite like it, pots, pans, clanking chains, and what might be a broken flute, basically. Every object that's ever offended a sleeping villager is now part of the ensemble. This raucous performance is paraded outside the accused's home, sometimes for hours. And no, this isn't just a party. It's an acoustic form of emotional torment. Historians still argue whether charivari was meant more for moral correction or just collective mischief, because honestly, there's a blurry line between justice and a very enthusiastic block party. Either way, the man at the post has clearly endured a full episode of sonic punishment. And now comes phase 2, symbolic dressing. Someone's put a giant set of donkey ears on his head. Another person ties a wooden yoke around his neck, loaded with symbolic items, 1 shoe for his betrayal, a dead chicken for unknown metaphorical reasons, and a cabbage, probably because no punishment is complete without one. In medieval villages, the idea was to turn your crime into a joke, but one that everyone had to laugh at except you. Public mockery wasn't just therapy for the offended spouse. It was entertainment, bonding ritual, and moral instruction all in one. You watch a group of teenagers reenact the donkey ear dance nearby, as if TikTok existed in the form of interpretive mime. Over in ancient Rome, though, shaming had legal teeth. If you were a woman accused of adultery, especially from a high-status family, you might be marched through the streets, stripped of your dowry, and legally disowned. Roman fathers even had the right to kill both the daughter and her lover in certain circumstances. You might think that's extreme, but Romans were all about order. And cheating disrupted the very Roman concept of virtus, a blend of manliness, discipline, and moral seriousness that could apparently be undone by one candlelit tryst. But not every punishment was bloody. Some were just creative. One record describes a man sentenced to sweep the forum, wearing only a woman's tunic, while reciting a legal oath backwards. Another was forced to host a feast for the entire neighborhood while being forbidden to eat a bite. Because nothing says don't cheat, like hangry regret served on stone plates, back in the village, the donkey-eared man has been released, his walk home followed by goats and gossip. The donkey ears will come off, but the nickname won't. From this day on, he'll be Ears, and every time he tries to flirt, someone will make braying noises. Justice is swift, but mockery is forever. You'd think that once the shame parade ends, the village would move on. But no, now it's time for the corrective rituals. Because apparently, the only thing worse than adultery is failing to turn it into a teaching moment. You find yourself squatting by the fountain as a neighbor whispers about the latest punishment, public bed reconsecration. Yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. No, it's not as romantic as it sounds. In certain parts of medieval France and Germany, if a couple wanted to reconcile after one had strayed, the local clergy and sometimes half the village would supervise the ceremonial re-blessing of their shared mattress. This sacred rectangle of straw and sweat was carried through the streets, with villagers tossing petals or, more often, cabbage leaves, because why not? They're cheap, symbolic, and slightly insulting. The couple would then lie on this bed, fully clothed, thankfully, with hands tied together, while a priest read psalms about virtue patience, and the horrors of lust. Meanwhile, peasants watched and nodded solemnly, as if this deeply awkward display proved something about moral restoration. Historians still argue whether these rituals were sincerely spiritual or just a last-ditch village attempt to control scandal using rope and scripture. In ancient Rome, reconciliations were less floral and more transactional. If the husband chose to forgive his wife, he had to publicly state that she had repented and taken a moral bath metaphorically, not literally, because Roman hygiene had its own issues. But there was a catch: the woman's father might lose legal claims to her dowry, depending on who forgave whom and how public the admission was. So, reconciling wasn't just about feelings. It was real estate negotiation disguised as moral maturity. Still, reconciliation had its perks, mainly not getting exiled, executed, or forced to wear symbolic cabbage on your chest. Back in the village, you watch as the couple walks home from the ritual bed procession, a little too stiffly, as if both are dying from secondhand embarrassment. Children giggle, grandmothers shake their heads, and someone's already carving the event into the church bench for posterity. Sometimes. The accused was forced to perform a penance play, a solo act in the middle of the square involving costumes, self-deprecating song, and an exaggerated reenactment of their betrayal, using vegetables as props. It sounds like dinner theater. It was not. It was reputation CPR in burlap clothing. One man once reenacted his entire affair using a turnip for himself and a rutabaga for his mistress. It brought the house down. And by house, we mean the tavern. You can't help but notice the sheer performative energy of it all. Justice was less about fairness and more about drama, like medieval reality television. Except no one gets voted off, just publicly humiliated until morale improves. And people say the Middle Ages were dark. Even the concept of forgiveness became a public act. You had to prove it through rituals that were more awkward than sincere, turning private pain into public theater. And if the couple failed to reunite after all that cabbage and chanting, then the next punishment was exile, or worse, remarriage, to someone chosen by the village council. So, what happens when reconciliation fails? Simple. You pack your things well, your one wooden bowl and a goat, and prepare for public shunning. Not exile. No, that would be too swift. You're not banished. You're ignored, which, in a tightly packed medieval village with 6 houses, 2 pigs, and 1 water source, is actually more devastating than it sounds. The punishment of shunning was both petty and deeply efficient. You could still live in the village, but no one would speak to you, help you, or even acknowledge your existence. Need firewood, chop it yourself. Sick cow, hope you're good at veterinary improv. Want bread, the baker will look through you like a ghost with terrible morals and not enough coin. In Roman cities, it played out differently: less icy silence, more sarcastic graffiti. If your infidelity was particularly scandalous, someone might carve a delightful message near the bathhouse wall. Something like Lucilla shares more than olives, or Felix has 2 wives and 1 brain. Historians still argue whether these were actual punishments or just recreational roasting. Either way, reputations in ancient Rome crumbled under the weight of a well-placed scribble. Back in the village, things escalated with what we'd now call symbolic shaming installations. You wake one morning to find a wooden effigy hanging near your door, an exaggerated version of your face, grinning like a mischievous potato, with a ribbon that reads, "This one cheats." It's not legally binding, but your social standing just plummeted faster than a medieval chicken falling off a fence. And just when you think it can't get worse, enter the rough music. This was a glorious blend of percussion, cruelty, and community bonding. The villagers would gather outside your house at night with pots, pans, bells, and anything else that made noise. Then they'd perform a raucous musical piece, tailored just for you, often accompanied by rude lyrics or chants like "Baker bakes with more than flour." You couldn't sleep, you couldn't hide, and you definitely couldn't escape the beat. In some areas, your punishment came in edible form. If you were caught cheating, the village might deliver a large, unsalted loaf of betrayer's bread. It was about as dry as your current social prospects. You'd be expected to eat it in front of others. A culinary walk of shame. The crust blackened to resemble your soiled soul. The center hollow, like your moral core. But perhaps the most terrifying punishment of all, forced seating. You're made to sit in the scold's chair, a stiff, uncomfortable wooden throne placed right in the town square. There you sit for hours, holding a sign that confesses your crimes, while children poke you with sticks and elders offer unsolicited marriage advice. It's part time out, part live theater, part cautionary tale. Tourists, well, merchants loved it, of course. If the unfaithful party had enough wealth or status, they might escape these humiliations altogether. Nobles weren't immune to scandal, but their consequences were usually whispered, not shouted. They got private shame, sealed letters, and awkward dinner parties. You get percussion therapy and a haunted loaf of bread, and still, you can't help but marvel at the creativity. There's a weird brilliance in how communities turned moral judgment into folk art. Every punishment, no matter how absurd, was a symbol, a warning, a group effort. It was justice by committee, with a flair for theater and a complete disregard for personal dignity. Just when you thought medieval punishment couldn't get more bizarre, we enter the realm of props. Not real weapons or instruments of torture. No, that would be too predictable. We're talking vegetables, costumes, painted donkeys, and elaborate wooden contraptions that made your embarrassment both public and unforgettable. Let's begin with the humble cabbage. In some regions, adulterers were paraded around the village with a massive cabbage tied around their neck, like a pendant of shame. Why cabbage historians still argue whether this was a symbol of moral rot, a culinary insult, or simply because cabbages were available and heavy. Either way, it's hard to maintain dignity when your bling is a leafy brassica. Roman cities, of course, had their own prop game. The fasces, a bundle of rods carried by lictors, symbolized authority. But when it came to personal disgrace, you might instead be gifted a wooden phallus. Yes, that's right. A literal, sculpted, oversized symbol of your overactivity. Sometimes it was worn like a pendant. Other times paraded in front of your house. Subtlety, never heard of it. But let's return to the countryside, where creativity thrived alongside potatoes and passive aggression. If your affair was particularly scandalous, the town might organize a mock wedding between you and a pig. You'd be marched in circles around the village square, while a pig, gussied up in ribbons, oinked beside you like your unwilling betrothed. It was symbolic, humiliating, and surprisingly well attended. Bring your own turnips. There was also the dreaded cheater's yoke, a heavy wooden frame placed around your shoulders, often decorated with painted symbols, broken hearts, crying babies, or tiny devils. You'd be made to walk from house to house, apologizing to each resident like a very sad, morally compromised caroler. Bonus points if they pelted you with stale bread, which, let's be honest, was most bread back then. Occasionally, the props extended into live performance. Communities would stage little morality plays based on your scandal. Imagine puppets reenacting your adultery, complete with high-pitched voices and tiny wooden beds. The puppet show might end with your puppet self being thrown into a toy pond or stomped by a righteous goose. The message was clear: fidelity matters. And so does puppet theater. Roman cities had a more artistic, but no less brutal approach. Murals. If you were wealthy and shameless, someone might paint your romantic failings on a wall. Not just graffiti, but full-on narrative frescoes. You and your lover, mid-affair, rendered in questionable proportions with exaggerated facial expressions. It's like a medieval comic strip starring you, and guess what? The public gets free viewing, daily, even in the courtroom. Props made an appearance. One record from the 14th century mentions a trial where the accused had to carry a symbolic sack labeled trust, and then publicly rip it in half. The trial ended with villagers sewing it back together while chanting things like, "Mend your ways and stitch your soul." It's emotional theater with a needle and thread. The props weren't just punishment, they were memory. A lingering visual gag that etched your mistake into the minds of your neighbors. And in communities where history lived more in storytelling than parchment, props were the glue. They were artifacts of gossip, heirlooms of humiliation, and sometimes, if repurposed, a cabbage stew the next day. So no, you couldn't just cheat and sneak away. You cheated, and the town turned it into an art installation. You betrayed, and someone painted your donkey. You lied, and the puppet troupe went on tour. Forget the stocks. True medieval justice came with glitter, pig weddings, and emotional cabbages. If props were the stage, then village festivals were the theater, and what better time to publicly humiliate someone than during a feast, right before everyone digs into roast goose and diluted wine. Welcome to the annual tradition of turning your affair into an awkwardly choreographed parade with drums, shouting children, and absolutely no privacy. Let's say your secret romance has just been exposed, perhaps thanks to an overly curious goat, or the fact that your love letters were accidentally written on communal washing stones. Perfect timing. The Spring Plowing Festival is just around the corner. Instead of being shunned, quietly, you're now the centerpiece of a symbolic ritual with the subtlety of a slap made of wet rye. You might be cast as the fertility fool, a real role in some celebrations, where you'd be dressed in patchwork rags and made to dance clumsily while villagers chanted rhymes about broken promises and wandering hearts. Your partner in crime, if equally caught, might be forced to wear a cowbell and moo when spoken to. Historians still argue whether these rituals were meant to purify the village or just entertain the kids. In Roman Saturnalia, a similar opportunity arose. This topsy-turvy holiday celebrated chaos, and role reversal. Servants dined like masters, and social norms were temporarily flipped. The perfect time for public jabs. Poets would perform verses mocking specific citizens you. For example, for loving both the wine and the neighbor's wife. And of course, everyone laughed, except you, because in Saturnalia, nothing was sacred, including your recent midnight visit to someone else's atrium. But don't worry, medieval villages had entire charivari parades just for you. A rough music procession, where pots, pans, and wooden clappers would be banged together as the villagers escorted you and your illicit partner through the streets on a donkey, or worse, backwards on a cart, while hurling insults that would make a monk blush. You were expected to smile and wave. Participation was mandatory. Dignity was not. Sometimes the event concluded with a symbolic punishment. One particularly famous tradition, the cuckold's horns. These were enormous wooden antlers worn like a crown, signifying that your partner had strayed and now you were spiritually part deer. This wasn't a one-time gag. You might wear them for weeks, especially if your community believed your silence had somehow enabled the affair. And yes, children were allowed to decorate the horns with colorful ribbons. The logic behind these public performances wasn't just moral shaming, it was community control. In tight-knit medieval towns, where written law was loose and justice was a team sport, festival rituals let people blow off steam, point fingers, and re-establish social order. Through cabbage, puppets, and donkey parades, and in many cases, the cheating couple had to fund the entire show. That's right, you paid for the tambourines, the streamers, and the after-parade goat stew. Not unlike being billed for your own surprise party. Only this one ends with you crying in the stocks next to a guy dressed as a symbolic carrot. The truth is, festivals were just an excuse to gossip freely, to vent your frustrations, and to make sure everyone knew who'd broken the unspoken rules. And while some parts were silly, others could haunt you for years. Once you've been cast as the unfaithful jester in the village morality play, it's hard to go back to being just Thomas the Miller. So next time you hear medieval music and think of romance and candlelight, remember sometimes that lute was strumming a song about you and your cowbell-wearing lover. You would think that after the goose, the fish, the donkey, the bed parade, and the communal rhyming confessions. Things couldn't get more exhausting. But oh no, there's one last act in this tragicomic operetta exile: reinvention, or slow social extinction. You wake up the next day, not to bells or mobs, but to silence, which, in a medieval village, is a much worse sound. People don't speak to you, or if they do, it's only to correct your moral compass with performative concern. The baker forgets your order. The tavern suddenly runs out of ale when you walk in. Children point and whisper behind bundles of firewood. You've become less a person, more a walking cautionary tale. Not even the town pig wants to be seen with you. In some towns, you're politely asked to leave. In others, not so politely. Historians still argue whether this slow freeze-out was an organized system or just a spontaneous social immune response. Either way, it works. You either pack your things and seek a new town willing to ignore your reputation, or you stay and become a shadow unmarriable, unemployed, and uninvited. Roman cities, for all their concrete glamour, weren't much better. If you were an upper-class woman caught in adultery, your entire social network might collapse overnight. Parties canceled. Marriage prospects gone. Even your slaves might look at you differently, which says a lot considering Roman ethics. And if you were the man caught seducing someone else's wife, well, you might avoid death, but you definitely earn yourself a new name in the public graffiti: Loverus Maximus, but not in a good way. The strangest part, some punishments were performatively reversed if the affair was forgiven. Yes, If your spouse decided to accept you back, you had to publicly rejoin society in another cringeworthy ritual. One French record describes a man being paraded through town in a giant cradle, symbolizing his rebirth as a faithful husband. Witnesses reported the event as both tragic and hilarious. Honestly, the perfect medieval tagline. And then came the rumors. Oh, the rumors. If you tried to quietly move on, people just got more creative. You could be celibate for a decade and still get blamed when someone's goat went missing. Because that's how public shame works, it lingers like the smell of dried fish and injustice. But perhaps the most ironically cruel punishment of all was nothing. In some cases, no bell, no fish, no exile. Just the slow rot of social disdain. People smiling to your face but whispering at the well. You remain in the village, but your name is no longer spoken in songs or stories, only in side glances. You're not even interesting enough to humiliate anymore. You've graduated into historical footnote status, and in the end, that's what medieval justice was really about. Not balance, not fairness, but visibility. To be seen, judged, ridiculed, and then quietly erased. You take your final walk through the square, barefoot, reputation in tatters, and realize the show is over. The bells stopped ringing. The donkey's gone home. The fish is, well, probably still somewhere nearby. But you've served your time. And tomorrow, the village will need a new scandal. And now, the bells fade. The donkey quiets. The goose, mercifully, stops staring at you with that knowing judgment in its glass eyes. The crowd, once so animated in its righteous cruelty, drifts back to their routines, baking, weaving, gossiping, forgetting. You, dear listener, are left not in stocks or shame, but in soft sheets. The only noise, now a gentle hush, a closing sigh from centuries past. So let yourself drift. Let the rituals and rhymes dissolve. You are no longer on the fish cart or tangled in village spectacle. You are safe in this moment, wrapped in stillness. Whatever sins you carried in medieval times, they can stay there. Tonight, you've made it out. Perhaps not clean, but at peace. Sleep well, my scandalous time traveler. The show is over. The lights are down, and the world is finally quiet.